Hey folks, so in recognition of hitting 40,000 subscribers on the channel, I'm going to be doing an FAQ vid. I normally try to do one of these like every 10,000 or so, or do something like interactive with you guys. And you posted a lot of really good questions, so I'm going to try and get through most of these, even though there are some with a little bit of overlap. First, I got a few overlapping questions asking with different phraseology about my day job, my political office, and like how I structure time management. My day job outside of gaming and politics is working as an IT manager for a medium-sized technology company. It keeps me very busy on some weeks and other weeks less busy. So, it's a regular office job. There's not a lot really else to say about it. My political office, I recently retired, quote unquote retired, from serving in my local legislative assembly. I served 10 years as an elected state-level legislator here in the United States. After 10 years, I decided to retire. I didn't run for re-election. And I made that decision way back when I first ran in 2012. I told all of my friends, kick my ass if I'm still doing this in 10 years. Because I don't want to be a career politician. I don't want to be institutionalized by it. I still see the outrageous things and recognize them as being outrageous. I still am offended when I see the corruption, like firsthand. I haven't been numbed to any of it. And I didn't want to lose that perspective. So I called it quits after 10 years. I may go back at some point in the future. There's a lot of other folks locally who want me to run for other offices. I might do something else. But for now, I'm retired after my 10 years. In terms of how I do my time management, very carefully. Okay, Jack Phobia really wants to know my opinion on Heinz beans. And he also asked some questions about like my political office and all that, and what kind of music I listen to. So I have never had Heinz beans. I'm sorry to disappoint there, so I can't really say anything. I already talked about my political career. And in terms of music, so really everything except country western is what I listen to. The soundtrack that I crank when I'm playing War Thunder for fun is usually game soundtracks from like the 8-bit and 16-bit era. An enormous amount of stuff I've downloaded off of OC Remix. The playlist in my car is really all of the above. I've got Japanese opera and Rob Zombie back to back, so you can fill in the gaps there. He also asked what's my favorite karaoke song. Dude, I can't sing to save my life. Sorry. Okay, Scott Wagner asks about features I'd like to see added into the game in the future, considering, what we've seen with the roadmap, and obviously Real Shatter's probably the number one thing that has to get fixed right now. I would say that rearranging some of the dynamics of Air RB is going to become really critical over the next 18 months or so, as some of the new 4th generation stuff with, a larger quantity of active radar missiles and everything are all added into the game. And this relates to some questions later. But the main thing I'd like to see is some of the reimagining of Air RB take place to accommodate the addition of Cold War era jet bombers. And I actually have a whole video up on that topic. Scott also asked, what nation or region would I like to see added to the game? I would like to see India added as a standalone nation, possibly as like the lead nation, like, the main skeleton of a universal tech tree encompassing like all of the other minor nations that aren't really represented in the game yet. That, produced some of their own military equipment, but not really enough to flesh out a whole tech tree. I'd rather see one like tech tree, maybe give it like the United Nations flag or something like that, that has all of those minor nations sort of grouped into one, rather than just keep adding subtrees and subtrees into the existing major factions. Shazoto Toog asks, and I apologize in advance, I'm going to butcher some of you guys' screen names here. If I had free choice of a War Thunder event, what would the theme of the event be, and what would the rewards be if anything new was added? So I would really like to see, and I say this with the disclaimer, I know that this would be difficult to implement in War Thunder. I would like to see some EC maps that are over-the-horizon carrier battle group fights, where all of the aircraft are naval aircraft, taking off from like a small group of carriers, going off to fight, the other team who are also taking off from a group of carriers. And you've got like destroyers and stuff like that you can engage, surface combatants that you can attack and will shoot back, instead of like airfield SPAA, shooting you down if you get too close. Maybe have an Aegis cruiser, parked next to the carrier, something like that. I realize that would be difficult to work out. Not all of the factions in game have suitable high tier or even medium tier carrier aircraft, but that's an idea I would really like to see developed further in terms of like being, a summer, a special event or something. What prizes I'd like to see from it? Probably some naval aircraft. Colby McDowell asks about my favorite low-tiered vehicle that I like playing just because it's simple and I enjoy it. And if I have a go-to favorite snack or drink while gaming, in my free time. My favorite low-tier vehicles are probably the I-16 family in the Soviet tech tree, the Rat. I love that little thing. It's goofy, it's silly, it's easy to shoot down, but it's extremely maneuverable, and I have a lot of fun with it. I love the Shkas. I love absolutely just filling the sky with tracers. In terms of favorite gaming snack or drink, I would say that Diet Mountain Dew is my poison of choice. No special reason over like regular Mountain Dew or some other beverage. I honestly just like the taste better. And there were a few other people who asked about coffee. I'm not a coffee person. WG1471 asks if I have flown VTOL in VR. Yes. I'll say that it's a lot of fun, and I got an absolutely enormous sense of satisfaction. The first time I was able to land the Yak-38 on the Kiev-class carrier in the test flight, entirely in VR mode. Take off, go attack the AI targets in the test flight, and then go back and land on the carrier, entirely in VR, using VTOL. That's incredibly fun, and I really enjoyed it. Anti-Villain Wolf asks if I have any advice for someone who does live streaming on a fairly regular basis. Just have fun. If I have a live stream up, like while I'm doing chores around the house, while I'm working on something on my primary monitor or whatever, if the person's having fun and it's obvious they're having fun, that's a good live stream. Kaguya's Beat asks how advanced I'd like to see aircraft get in War Thunder, and like if there's a point where I think it would get stale because it's too advanced or whatever. That sort of relates back to the question I answered a few minutes ago, that the team deathmatch air battles game modes, primarily RB, but also arcade as well, even though I don't play arcade at high tier, really need to be revamped. There need to be meaningful objectives other than just deathmatch, dogfight, shoot down the other team, human-controlled vehicles on the other team. And there has to be a meaningful incentive to complete those other objectives. They need to introduce some game modes or some maps or something where there is a meaningful win condition beyond just shooting down the other players. And the reason I say that is don't get me wrong. I'm not saying get rid of the team deathmatch thing. That'll be here forever. It's fun. I enjoy it. It's great. However, there are a lot of different types of aircraft that I think could be a lot of fun in the game that do not fit into that particular type of match. I posted a video recently where I sent a fairly detailed proposal to Gaijin about some changes they could make to implement reconnaissance vehicles. I sent one a year ago suggesting changes on how they could implement like Cold War era jet bombers, right? And now we're going to be getting on the cusp, probably maybe about 2 years from now, where we're going to see some stealth aircraft get added into the game. Some like late 4th generation or early 5th generation fighters. I really think when that happens, it's going to necessitate some structural changes to the way that some of the dynamics and objectives work inside the matches. Otherwise, yeah, I think that will get stale when you just get a bunch of stealth aircraft that have a really hard time seeing each other, trying to just waste a whole bunch of radar missiles that don't do anything and then getting close for a bunch of IR missiles that struggle, and then they all run out of cannon ammo trying to gunfight each other. That will get stale. So I hope they come up with some creative changes to, the actual matches before we get to that point. Oriol Guerrero asks about vehicles I'd like to see added into the game without any consideration for like balance or gameplay, just to have them there for fun. Yeah, I would really like to see some Cold War era jet bombers. The British V bombers, the Tu-16, probably the Tu-16 especially, the B-47, maybe move up to some like medium supersonic bombers like the Mirage 4. There's another really good one, the B-58, the Tu-22. Not really so much the heavier stuff like the B-52 or the Tu-95, but like medium bombers from the Cold War era, I'd really love to see added to the game. But again, they probably have to rework the matches a little bit to make them fit. Ya boy Mitt asks about BVR missiles like AMRAAMs or R-77s and like how it's going to change the meta and everything. That sort of relates back to what I was mentioning a minute ago, where as the technology in the game progresses, they're going to have to rethink some of the game modes a little bit. But as things stand right now, Gaijin has said they're going to be adding some more active radar missiles towards the end of 2023. In the current meta, I think that is going to push combat closer to the ground even more than it is already, just to try and avoid BVR active radar missile spam. If you think it's a problem now in top-tier air battles where 30 seconds into the match, there's 15 AIM-54s in the air as a whole bunch of the F-14s took off, rippled off their Phoenixes, and then turned around to go land. By the way, that's a shitty tactic. Don't do that. If you think that's a problem now, just wait until there's like 3 or 4 planes in each tech tree that have AMRAAMs or equivalent. It's going to necessitate some really serious changes to the meta, and I think it's hard to predict how that's going to turn out. Major Foch asks if I think it'd be possible to see the Mirage 3V in the game. So for those who don't know, there was a prototype version of the French Mirage 3 jet fighter with some lift jet engines in it. It was a vertical takeoff and landing prototype that was produced. It didn't really end up being a militarily viable sort of a thing, but they did play around with it and it did work. Yeah, I don't see any reason we couldn't have something crazy like that in the game. Probably as like an event vehicle or a premium or something. Because, anytime somebody asks me if I think some really weird oddball thing could find its way into the game, my brain always immediately goes to, we still have the R2Y2 in the Japanese tech tree, which essentially didn't exist. So, yes, I think it's possible we could see that in the game. Woodward Wilson asked a very long question I'm going to paraphrase. If I think that War Thunder can be described as an institution, or if it's just a popular, MMO sort of a game. I think both. I think within the subgenre of like military flight sim, tank sim, boat sim games, War Thunder is an institution. Within the larger sphere of online gaming generally, I think it's just one of many popular MMOs. He also asked if someone had told me when I first started playing, like, back in the very early days of War Thunder, if I would have laughed them out of the room if they told me that, in X years, War Thunder would have like supersonic 4th gen fighters with long range missiles and stuff, or like how I would have reacted to that. It wouldn't have surprised me one bit. I saw that, after like the first couple of patches with War Thunder, it was obvious to me, as soon as I saw that they were actually going to add jet aircraft, like the Me-262 and all that. It became pretty obvious that we were going to see eventually Korean War era jets. And then once we actually got the MiG-15 and the F-86, it became obvious to me that they were just going to keep going with the timeline as long as they could and as long as the game was successful. And I actually have a couple other people asked some related questions about like my experiences playing War Thunder from the very beginning. I actually have a whole separate video up, and I'm sorry, it's like an hour long, talking about, my experiences playing War Thunder over an entire decade of time. So you should check that out. Shameless plug. TSF71 asks, at any point did I think War Thunder would become this big of a game when I first started making videos? It already was. Simple answer. Garrison Childs asked a question about something I mentioned in a live stream about getting to fly an aerobatic aircraft, and he wanted to know how I got that opportunity. Yeah, so back when I was still a student pilot, this was in 1998, so back in the day, there was a competition where I don't even remember what the exact details were. It was like for the person who got the highest combined score on like a written exam and like their pre-solo check ride or something like that. There was some scoring system, but the person who got the highest score got to go do a 90-minute flight in a Mudry Cap 10, which is a single-engine light stunt plane. And I won the little competition among the other student pilots. So I got to go fly for almost 2 hours in a Mudry Cap 10. It's a little civilian stunt plane from I think they were originally made in like the 1960s through like the 70s. It's an older aircraft, but oh my goodness, was it a lot of fun. It's rated for, I think, 6 Gs. I ended up going up to about 5 a few times in some sustained turns. That was really crazy, pulling 5 Gs. The thing that surprised me the most about it was the very first time, like, cranking the stick into, like, a 3G turn. Oh, my goodness, does it snap your head back, and you're not ready for it the first time. So that was kind of weird. And the instructor I was flying with, he laughed and laughed, said absolutely everybody has that experience. Incidentally, that was also the first time I ever wore a parachute while flying a plane. So that was a little harrowing for the first 30 seconds. But yeah, a lot of fun doing all sorts of hammerheads and Immelmans and, just high G horizontal turns and tail slips and all this other crazy stuff. That was a really good time. Sax Sniper asks if there's any chance I'd consider doing ground vehicle reviews. Probably not. At least not in the near term, using the same format as I do for my aircraft reviews. And there's a number of reasons for that. For right now, I've been trying to do ground content as live matches. I have a playlist, if you look at the playlists on my channel, of ground vehicle videos where I do War Thunder pairings, which is where I take 2 vehicles that I like to use together, and another one where I'm just rolling out in some random ground vehicle doing some live commentary. If those do well, I might consider doing some ground vehicle reviews in the same format as my aircraft reviews and stuff. I might do one or two towards the later part of the year as like a test balloon to see how they perform, but we'll see. Kenel Ray asks about aircraft I'd like to see added into the game. Well, I've already mentioned Cold War era jet bombers as being pretty high on the list. In terms of things that wouldn't require like changes to the meta or anything like that, I'd like to see them finish the American Century series. The F-101, probably one of my favorite aircraft of all time. The F-102, the F-106, I'd love to see those get added in. The MiG-25 is on my list, but I'm going to talk about that in a couple minutes. But here's a curveball I'm going to throw you, something you've probably never heard of. The Caproni Campini N1. You're scratching your head wondering what that is. Well, believe it or not, back during the late 1930s and early 1940s, the Italians produced a motor jet-powered aircraft. It was a prototype. It was never armed or anything. But they did have plans to develop it into, I think it was going to be called like the CA-183 or something like that. There were plans to produce this motor jet-powered fighter in, World War II era Italy. They actually made a couple of unarmed prototypes of it, and it worked. The performance would be extremely low. I mean, it would be like the P-59 in the American tech tree. Like this would be a rank 3 motor jet aircraft. But I think it would add a lot of novelty, and I'd love to see it. Owen G asked a question I'm going to paraphrase about how I decide what format I'm going to use for my reviews, meaning if it's going to be a quick review, a basic review, or a detailed review. Well, the short answer is it just depends on how much I have to say about it. Something like the Su-39 that I did recently that added in some new gameplay mechanics, that ended up being a detailed review because there's a bunch of new information to present. I went into into more detail about like the IRST system, and using the Vickers missiles and whatnot, the air-to-ground radar. It added a bunch of new things into the game. So the review ended up going a bit longer. That's why I label those as detailed reviews. There are also quick reviews. For example, the AJS-37, the new Vigan, I already have the review of that is produced and uploaded. It's not published yet. That's in my quick review format. I call it a quick review because there's not a whole lot of new information to present. It's another Vigan. It's extremely similar to the other Vigans that are already in the game. So I talked primarily about the differences. And it's a shorter video. Instead of, my normal format ranges about 11 to 12 minutes most of the time. My review on the AJS-37 ended up coming in at like 8 minutes. So I label that as a quick review. So I don't really set out in advance and decide, okay, this aircraft I'm going to do a detailed review on. This one is a basic review. It really just depends on how much I have to say about it. Eli CQ9B asks about the cockpit fire I had in a Cessna and the MiG-25. I'm going to handle these separately. First, when I was a student pilot, I had less than 20 hours in the air at this point. Routine training flight with my instructor, who is this crazy Russian guy. Really fun pilot, cold in a crisis, very calm during an emergency like this, but really good sense of humor. He loved like aerobatic flying, really, really just fun guy. He had a lot of really advanced civil aviation experience over in Russia during the 1980s and early 1990s before he moved to the United States. This guy had like L-39s and Tu-154s in his logbooks. He was a very experienced pilot. And here he was teaching me how to fly a Cessna. I don't know how he wound it up at a small rinky-dink flying school here in the U.S., but he was really a really fun guy to have as an instructor. But anyway, we were on a routine flight, and we heard this weird sound. It sounded like someone was crinkling up an empty bag of potato chips. And we looked at each other like, huh? And then it stopped, and we're like, okay. And we went back to what we were doing. I think we're doing like turns around a point in a field, just some real basic like flight navigation stuff. And then it started again, and we looked at each other, and before like I could even open my mouth to say, what is that? We heard a couple of loud pops. About a third of the circuit breakers in the plane snapped. And the cockpit just whoosh, just flooded with this really gross smelling smoke. And without even missing a beat, I tell you, this guy had like nerves of steel. He says to me, like before we've even ventilated the cockpit, he says to me, do not worry, we are in complete control, with his like very thick Russian accent. He was just calm as ice during this. And we opened the windows of the plane. He actually opened his door for a second because he was a very seat of the pants kind of pilot. To ventilate the cockpit, we turned down the vents, got the airflow going. That took about like not even 5 seconds. Then he ran me through this quick checklist of like, okay, we have to figure out what's actually busted. We looked at the circuit breakers, figure out, okay, these are the ones that popped. Make sure we still had engine control. Looked at our flying instruments, make sure those were all still working. And you got to remember, this was in 1998, so this was the days before most Cessnas had glass cockpits or anything like that. I'm still working on pressure gauges for like airspeed, and you know the attitude indicator was still an analog instrument at the time and all that. All the instruments looked fine, but we noticed that the radio was out, the transponder wasn't working, and the radio direction finder was dead. So, you know, we sort of narrowed down, okay, and that matched what we saw popped for circuit breakers. So again, totally cool guy without even missing a beat. It's like, okay, we go back to airport, you know, land with a light gun. We weren't out in the middle of nowhere. It was only like maybe a 10-minute flight back to the airport. We set the transponder anyway, even though it was off, you know, just for good measure, you know, to run through like the practice. He used it as a teaching opportunity, to go through, you know, a more practical example of, okay, this is what, you know, these are the emergency things we do if there's like an equipment failure and all this. But this is what we do when you don't have any communication. So we're going to go through all these procedures. And we got back to the airport. And I actually got to land the plane using the light gun signals from the control tower. For those who don't know, in general aviation, if you don't have any radio or anything, like if your radio catches on fire and dies, or you're in some little ultralight that doesn't have one, and you need to land at a controlled airport. This was at a Class D airport. The control tower will flash you signals with a light gun, and you know, a green or a red light flashing or steady in a pattern, and that'll tell you what to do, whether you should fly around, if it's okay to land, if it's not okay to land, so on and so on. So yeah, we actually landed with the light gun signals. That was pretty crazy. And I hadn't even soloed at that point. So yeah, I got my in-flight emergency out of the way very early in my flight training. Okay, so the MiG-25. The MiG-25 is something that is often talked about on forums, Reddit, YouTubers, so on and so on. I want to get it out of the way right up front that in War Thunder's game modes, you would never get to use the MiG-25 to its potential. It just doesn't fit. The MiG-25, of course, you know, is capable of Mach 3 if you overspeed and destroy the engines. The problem is, in order to actually get there, you have to climb up to an extremely high altitude that is useless in War Thunder, and it takes a while both to climb and to accelerate. So it's the sort of thing that you might do in a test flight just to see if it worked, but it doesn't have any value. Like those speeds and the ability to attain those speeds would not have any value in War Thunder's current game modes. And oh, by the way, it's got like no fuel whatsoever. So that's a thing. I would still absolutely love to see it. It would just not redefine the meta in the way that a lot of people think it would. The MiG-25 would be a pester plane. You know, it would be something like, it would fill a role in the meta similar to the Tornado, where you'd be worried and watching for them coming in from the flanks with a medium range missile as they just fly past at Mach 2. It would, it's not a dogfighter. The MiG-25 maxes out, I think, at like 4 Gs. It's a very low number. That's off the top of my head, so don't quote me on that. I know 20 people are already posting a correction. Actually, it's like 4.34, whatever. It's a low number, and it wouldn't really fit in War Thunder's game modes. So, and this relates back to what I had mentioned in one of the earlier questions, where in order for some of these other higher tech things to get added, they would have to restructure the matches a little bit. Like for something like the MiG-25, an enormous aircraft, it was never intended to be a dogfighter. It was never intended for fighter-to-fighter air combat. The MiG-25 was originally designed simply to fly through the air absolutely as fast as they could possibly make it go without melting itself. And it does that very well. It doesn't do much else. So unless you have a reason to do that one thing, an extremely fast attack pass in a straight line with medium range missiles, it's not going to be super useful in War Thunder. So I'd love to see it. I hope it gets added someday. I think a lot of players would be tremendously disappointed by it, but I think there's potential for it to be useful, either as more of a harassment aircraft, or if they were to redefine, and rework the missions a bit. Like on the larger EC maps, if there was a greater incentive to go shoot down those AI F-104 reconnaissance planes and stuff. The MiG-25 is a plane that would be useful for that. It could get there and do it faster than anything else. So there'd be a role for it in that case. The current matches, the current meta, the current game modes, it would be a struggle bus. But it would be a struggle bus that I would enjoy. Mick Young Gordloch also asked a question about my pilot experience. I talked about that a little bit, just light general aviation stuff. Although my medical is long expired, I haven't actually flown a plane probably since like 2004. So it's been a while. It's an expensive hobby. Latsu asks how I think the Gripen is going to affect the Air RB meta when it gets added into the game towards the end of the year. That depends what weapons they give it. If they give it the AMRAAMs, the AIM-120s, I think the answer to that question is going to be more centered around how the AIM-120s affect the Air RB meta, rather than the Gripen. Because the Gripen is going to have similar flight performance to the F-16 and the MiG-29. Yes, there's going to be caveats. I'm speaking very generally here, okay? So on its own, like if the Gripen comes in with semi-active and infrared missiles, I don't think it's going to change the meta at all. I think it will fit the meta extremely well, but it won't change it. If it comes in with the AMRAAMs, that's going to change things. And as to how, I'm not sure. Probably just, as I alluded earlier, just more people are going to be spamming them off towards the beginning of a match, and it'll be a mess, at least for a little while. Sergeant Whiskey Jack adds how I decide what vehicles I'm going to get the expert crew with as I'm going up through a tech tree. Great question. I want to say first, and this relates to some questions other people had about like grinding and progression. After the current War Thunder economy roadmap is complete, towards the end of this year, I'm going to I'm going to spend a little bit of time, go through, form some opinions, and make a fresh video with some advice on grinding the tech trees to replace my current video on efficiently grinding the tech trees in War Thunder, which is still very relevant. But there's, that whole dynamic is going to change after some of these economic changes are done. So I'm going to redo that at some point, end of this year, beginning of next year. So keep an eye out. In terms of how I decide what I'm going to expert, the answer simply is when I'm grinding up through one of the tech trees, if I find a vehicle is doing very well for me, and I sort of realize, okay, this vehicle, rather than just this bracket, is going to be a very effective grinder, that's when I'll go through and get the expert crew and or the ace crew, because I know I'm going to be using that vehicle a lot, and the investment represents a good value. Now, there's a flip side to that where a lot of the aircraft that I'm reviewing for the YouTube videos, I will almost always expert the crew. Some of them I will ace the crew, like the F-14B, the MiG-29. But the vast majority of vehicles, I will expert the crew just for capturing footage so that half the footage in the review isn't just pilot blackout. I don't fly a lot of the planes long term. Like the F-86K I did a review on, I will probably never touch that again because I didn't like the plane. But, I still experted the crew on it when I did the review. And yeah, that drains my silver lines quite a bit. So that's the answer to that. Bomb Brothers asked a question about War Thunder getting special types of vehicles into the game. He gave examples of aircraft carriers, submarines, hovercraft, whatever. We already have that. We have helicopters. I think, and this is my own supposition, I don't have any inside information on this, and I have suggested this to Gaijin, by the way, but I think when submarines get added in, they're going to get added the same way as helicopters for ground battles, where in order to spawn in a submarine, you're going to need some spawn points in a naval match. I don't know. We'll see. Aircraft carriers and some other stuff like AC-130s, I really don't know. In terms of player-controlled vehicles for that stuff, they'd really have to redo the current game modes in order for those to fit. Michael C. asks two questions that are kind of long. I'm going to paraphrase. If there's any advice I'd give myself 20 years ago, like Tim from the early 2000s, and if there's any chance of my going pro with content creation. Advice I would give myself 20 years ago. There is a job I would tell myself not to take. There is a woman I would tell myself not to date. And there is a car I would have told myself not to buy. Any chance of going pro with content creation? Well, that's not up to me. That's up to you guys. If my channel or one of my channels absolutely went crazy and hit 300,000 subscribers and every video I post was getting 100,000 views, I might actually make enough from the ad revenue, to do this as more of like a regular thing. But right now, my channel, even my War Thunder channel here, doing a 40,000 subscriber vid, this is tiny in the grander scheme of YouTube. Like the money I make off of this is not a lot. It's like a fourth, less than a fourth of what I would need to, cover my monthly bills and all that. So it's going to be a hobby, at least, for the foreseeable future. YFXXIII asks what my favorite BR matchmaker bracket to play is. Specifically about like ARB, but for other stuff too. I really like BR 10 to 11, where you're not fighting F-14s and MiG-29s, but you're still doing like IR missiles and some basic semi-active missiles and stuff. I also really enjoy entry-level jets and like rank 2 props. So there are a few spots in the tech trees I like. In terms of ground battles, it's all over the place. But primarily, I actually really like low-tiered ground battles. I love rank 1 tanks and doing rank 1, ground RB. Love it. Crazy fun, fast-paced. It's great. IG88 the Robot asked what my thoughts are on the Su-47 Berkut being added, and prototypes like the F-16 XL or the F-15 MTD. Maybe like X-29. I think stuff like that, if we get it into the game, will probably be event vehicles or unnecessarily expensive rank 8 premiums. That's what I think we'll probably see. The Eastern Spy asks how I think modern ships and naval combat could be added. That's easy. Huge maps. Modern surface warfare, and by modern I mean like 1970s forward, right? Is primarily about missiles. So if you want to get like modern destroyers and stuff, or like larger cruisers, like the Kirov or something, or like, the Ticonderoga class or something into War Thunder, huge maps. That's the answer to that. Conan O'Brien 1280 asks what my favorite Swedish aircraft is and what is my opinion on Swedish air repair costs. My favorite Swedish aircraft that is currently in the game is probably the Draken. My favorite Swedish aircraft overall is the Gripen, so I'm very much looking forward to that. My opinion on Swedish air repair costs is that they are too high, plain and simple. Zach Tack and a few others asked the perennial question about Discord server when, and he also asked about KSP2. So, in terms of Discord, not soon. The long answer, again, is I just don't have the time to moderate it. Now, when I say moderate, I don't care what people would be talking about. I'm not the kind of person who would censor posts or whatever. So it's like, oh, you suck, you're terrible at War. I don't care. I get criticism all the time. I don't care. But, if somebody was like posting classified documents, I would want to remove that. If somebody was posting death threats against another person on the Discord, I would want to remove that. Like criminal activity, I would want to remove. And there's absolutely no way I would have the time, plain and simple. Maybe someday, but not in the short term. In terms of KSP2, I have been playing it on and off all along for the last 6 months, and I have played it since the most recent patch. And a few folks have asked about fresh KSP2 content on my KSP channel. I don't know yet. KSP2 has really let me down. I will say very bluntly and honestly. I have not had the time to put it together yet, but at some point in the medium-term future, within the next few weeks, I'm going to have a video up on my KSP channel with a poll asking what the viewers want. If you guys want me to keep going with KSP2, even considering all of the problems it has, obviously once they get it fixed and sorted out, I'll be doing a lot more with it. But while it's still in early access alpha, I'm not even going to call it a beta. Do you want me to keep going with the alpha content in KSP2? Or would you like another KSP1 series? For example, a NASA-themed space program playthrough. So if you're into KSP, keep an eye on my channel. There will be some new stuff coming soon. Xbox Prodigy asks if I have a dedicated War Thunder squadron. No. I don't like having funny letters next to my name. I know it sounds like a silly thing, but that's the truth. I just don't like having the funny letters next to my name. One of my real life buddies who plays Warcraft, his name's Redcap, You can occasionally see him in some of my videos, helping me out in custom battles to like test things like the Su-39's IRST. He does squadron battle stuff. He's very active in like the squadron battles community. And he's constantly trying to rope me into either forming a squadron or joining a squadron or something. But I just don't want the funny letters next to my name. I'm sorry. If they had a way to hide that completely, maybe. I know it sounds silly, but it's personal preference. Blitz Royale and a few other people asked questions about my hardware and upgrades. So I am running on an AMD Threadripper 3960X, an RTX 3070 running, I have 128 gigs of RAM in my system, and a whole bunch of M.2 NVMe drives. So I generally tend to skip cycles with upgrading my hardware. Like my 3070, I upgraded from a 1070. I skipped the 20 series. I'm probably going to skip the 40 series and wait for like the RTX 50 series to come out, or maybe, you know, the AMD offerings a year and a half from now are going to be really competitive. You know, I'm not a fanboy, you know, of any particular PC, you know, parts vendor. So I'll probably be upgrading my video card like sometime in 2024 maybe. In terms of my CPU and all that, so I'm running Threadripper primarily because I actually need all the extra PCI Express lanes. And on the roadmap, unfortunately, the latest generation of HEDT processors from AMD and Intel that actually have the higher quantity of PCI Express lanes, they're all absolutely awful for gaming. The 3960X I'm running, the Threadripper model I have right now, hit a very narrow sweet spot where it still had the crazy workstation performance. It still had all the PCI Express lanes, and it still had relatively good gaming performance, and it still does. If on the roadmap, you know, AMD's Threadripper in like Zen 4 or Zen 5, those are supposed to be coming out like the end of next year sometime, the end of this year sometime into next year. If they come out with an HEDT version of those, a non-pro version that isn't awful for gaming, I would probably upgrade to that. Based on the roadmap, I have zero faith that Intel is going to give me anything suitable for less than $10,000. You know, Threadripper is already a pretty freaking expensive platform to be on. I saved up for a while to be able to afford my current rig. It wasn't something I went out and did an impulse buy for. And, you know, Intel's lineup for the same levels of performance is just crap at the price point. So I don't have any confidence they're going to have anything for me. But I don't know. Maybe they'll prove me wrong. Maybe they'll come out with a good, you know, a processor with good gaming performance and an extremely high quantity of PCI Express lanes. I need at least 30 or 40 PCI Express lanes for what I do. And that'd be a whole other video. So that's the story with my hardware. Max Gifford asks, most anticipated potential vehicle addition to War Thunder. In terms of things that have actually been announced or confirmed, Gripen. I mean, that's the obvious thing for me is Gripen. I'm really looking forward to that. Potential, I'm kind of excited for the Chinese J10. EDU JM5GH asked if I'm ever going to do aircraft reviews on prop families, like the FW190s, the BF109s, the P51s, and so on. You know, I get asked that periodically, and I really want to. It becomes a little bit of a challenge because some of the aircraft, right? Like I'm going to take the Spitfire as an example. I could do a family review of the Spitfires using the same format as I did for like the Su-7, where I did all three Su-7s in one video. The problem is the difference between an early model Spitfire and a late model Spitfire is extreme. And if I wanted to maintain my current level of quality with my reviews in terms of the information I present, a review on the entire family of Spitfires would be 90 minutes long. And ain't nobody got time for that. So I'm thinking, for the time being, I'm going to keep doing reviews on individual examples, like major models from those aircraft families, and use that sort of as like an anchor point, and do those in my regular basic review or detailed review format. And then maybe for some of the other models later on, months after the fact, do a quick review on, the next P-51 that was a minor update, and mostly talk about what's different, rather than just sort of regurgitate a lot of the same stuff all over again. So yeah, it's an interesting challenge. Aw for No asks if I think there will be another F-14 variant in War Thunder. Yeah, I'm pretty sure we're going to get the F-14D eventually. Quick, easy answer. Kevin Filstad asks if I play any instruments, or if I'd like to start learning sometime. I kind of play the keyboard a little bit, but I won't claim to be very good. Kernas86 Plane Guy asked if I had the ability to bring 2 aircraft prototypes that failed or never entered service back from the dead, what would they be? That's easy. The F-20 Tiger Shark and the IAI Lavi. Amazing aircraft that never had the chance to hit their potential. Tabs Russ asked how I feel about low-quality games and content that AAA high-budget titles have been producing. I feel pretty salty about it. I'll tell you, I've been in the gaming world since the 1980s. I'm an old fart. And modern gaming kind of sucks. Like, to all of you out there who are like maybe, under 25, like, I know a lot of folks from my generation and my age, we sometimes come off as smug and superior about how gaming was back in the day and all this stuff. But really, you don't know what you missed. Modern games like AAA titles like the latest Call of Duty or the latest FIFA or Madden title and all this stuff, they focus so much and they put so much attention and money and resources into crap that doesn't make the game any more fun. And it's a waste. They spent, I saw a developer interview with one of these guys at EA, and he was talking about how in one of their recent titles, that they had these couple of developers who spent like a month working on shadow fidelity and getting shadows to look just right in non-ray tracing mode when the shadow was partially reflected over water and partially reflected on a static surface. Like if there was a shadow that overcast over a puddle. And they were like really proud of the work they did on that. And I'm sitting here thinking, who the fuck cares? Like, that's a really dumb thing to spend development resources on, because nobody's going to notice. And even if you do a crap job on that particular type of a detail, nobody's going to notice. Spend your dev time making the game more fun and engaging. I would take Super Mario World or like Sonic 2 or like Civilization 3 even over the vast majority of modern AAA titles. And I'm reasonably convinced that if you took a 12-year-old who, is mature enough to be into games and to like get it without really needing a lot of hand-holding, but has not yet like grown into any particular genre or type of games or something, if you sat them down for like 3 hours of Diablo 4, and then sat them down for 3 hours of, some console classics or PC classics from the 90s, I would bet you some good money that they would pick the retro games as being more fun. Obviously there are exceptions, but like, look at Minecraft. Most successful game of all time, as far as I'm aware. The graphics on it are nothing special, but the gameplay is amazing. It's good, simple, honest, basic fun. And modern AAA titles don't focus on that, and it sucks, and I'm salty about it. So, yeah. Daniel IE3MT asks if I've considered playing other games or like having a community Minecraft server or something. Good news for you, buddy. I have 2 additional channels dedicated to other games. I have a dedicated channel for a Kerbal Space Program, and I have a dedicated channel for all of my variety gaming content, including some Minecraft stuff. So answer is yes. Would I consider like a Minecraft community server? If my channel exploded and I could start doing this as like a primary source of income or something, which, I don't think is realistic. But if that were to ever to happen, yes, I would absolutely love to have some like community servers and do more gaming with you guys instead of just for you guys, if that makes sense. Silver Case asks, pineapple on pizza or not? No! Where is your self-respect? No! Gustiwidianta asks what languages I'm fluent in, and where I get my sources for aircraft info. So in terms of my sources for aircraft info, I would refer you to my video on how I make my aircraft reviews. I talk a little bit about that and show you some examples out of my personal library. In terms of languages, I speak English, and obviously, and I speak a little bit of very basic Mandarin Chinese, and by basic, literally first or second grade level. My vocabulary is very limited, but it comes in handy with what I do for work, and I can't really elaborate past that. But 我不是中国人，可是我会说一点儿普通话，一点儿我说的不好。That one Reot guy asks when we can expect the new version of my radar IRST guide. Very soon. I have already started recording footage for it. Jacko BC asks if I'm aware of any good alternative strategies for consumer activism, and he referenced like the recent like review bombing and boycott stuff for War Thunder. That is a longer topic and it's a touchy subject. But I'm going to say it depends on what you're trying to achieve. And it depends on who and what you're protesting. There are strategies for protesting your government that are more and less effective. Some of those strategies do not carry over if you are trying to protest a company or an argumentative family member who doesn't treat you fairly, So, it's a much larger topic that kind of depends on what exactly you're trying to protest. But generally speaking, and I alluded to this in one of my videos about the War Thunder drama that happened recently. If somebody asks you not to use a particular method of protest, no, do not link arms and block that bridge. It usually means that that particular method of protest is extremely effective. And I speak from personal experience being on both sides of, pretty significant protests like that. Leandre Montel asks, what do I think about the French nation? I don't know. I've never been there. I think they probably speak a lot of French. Corp X asks if I'm a car guy in real life. Yes and no. I have a passive interest in like amateur racing, like SCA type stuff. But I'm not especially technically knowledgeable about like car repair I still bring my car to the garage for, you know, basic routine annual maintenance and things like that rather than do it myself. So yes, I'm a car guy in that I'm interested in automotives, like from an academic level and everything. And I have an interest in like automotive history. No, in that I'm not actually good at fixing cars myself. Wow. Okay. That's probably about all that I have the time for now. This has dragged on for quite a while. And if you actually made it to the end of this video, you are awesome. The viewer retention stats on videos like this usually sucks pretty bad. So if you made it all the way to the end, keep on kicking ass, and I love you forever. As always, thanks for watching.